The 2021 Corruption Perceptions Index, CPI, released by Transparency International on Tuesday, showed that Nigeria dropped 5 places from the 149th position in 2020 to the 154th place out of 180 countries that were assessed. The CPI rated Nigeria, which scored 24 out of 100 points in the 2021 index, as the second most corrupt country in West Africa after Guinea. This is coming against the backdrop of the government's avowed fight against graft and is Nigeria's third annual consecutive decline on the index. The country's score dropped from 26 in 2019 to 25 in the 2020 assessment and further to 24 in the 2021 index. Now joining us from our Abuja studio to discuss Nigeria's latest ranking on the CPI and what the authorities should be doing to reverse this trend is Samuel Asimi, Program Specialist with the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC, and Transparency International. Good morning, Mr. Asimi, and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, Samuel Asimi, thank you for joining us. Well, I mean, the report that we're talking about, the Corruption Perception Index, is not from CISLAC directly. But I assume that CISLAC is adopting that report, because I've seen a statement by Awale Rasfanjani, which was what was on the screen a few minutes earlier, and it's now back on the screen there. Could you take us through the major highlights of the report and the concerns of your own agency, the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruben Abati. So my name is Samuel Asimi, like you've mentioned. I work for CISLAC. CISLAC is also the national chapter of Transparency International in Nigeria. So CISLAC is Transparency International Nigeria. Looking at the statement which you've put up and looking at the issues we have, I think the general points from this report is that it's a wake-up call for us as Nigerians, state and non-state actors, to ensure that we actually do more to actually get the country rid of corruption and also ensure that the lives of citizens are actually bettered.
Yeah, I asked you about the concern of CISLAC because there were specific recommendations made in that statement by Rasfanjani.
Yes, if you look at the statement, we highlighted some weaknesses, and some of these weaknesses are actually out there in the open space. You could look at the lack of prosecution of high-profile cases of politically exposed persons. You could look at the damning audit report, which was published in November last year by the Auditor General. You could look at issues around corruption in the security sector, which was also highlighted in that audit report. You could look at issues around the shrinking civic space for human rights individuals and also anti-corruption fighters in Nigeria. You could look at issues around lack of transparency in the judiciary, especially around the appointment and discipline of judicial officials. And you could also look at issues around the response to the pandemic and issues of corruption, which we don't really have individuals and high-profile persons prosecuted or convicted of these crimes. So these are concerns for us, and we've actually pushed and we've been calling on the government to ensure that these gaps which are highlighted are actually blocked. We've called on the government to ensure that the necessary legislations, the necessary legal frameworks, you talk of whistleblower acts, you talk of proceeds of crime acts to manage recovered assets, to ensure that these things are in place, and to also ensure that some issues like proper investigation and prosecution is carried out. I give you an example. We had the Pandora Papers revelations last year. Within the African continent, Nigeria actually topped the chart of politically exposed persons mentioned. Why we are careful to state that these persons are not guilty, because we can't actually determine that. It has to be a law court. Our position has been that it's important for the government, anti-graft agencies and law enforcement agencies to provide answers to Nigerians who actually want to know if these people are really guilty or not. And since then and up till now, we've not really had any action. So these are the kind of gaps we actually highlighted, and these are the issues we feel the government should actually come out to resolve.
Well, those are important issues to highlight, but I'd like you to just take us through the Muhammadu Buhari administration's fight against anti-corruption. I mean, it's a plank of the C agenda, SCA, security, economics, and anti-corruption. Starting from the beginning, which was the Change Begins With Me campaign, which was such a disaster, ended up being mired in allegations of plagiarism and people saying change does not begin with them, it begins with the government, to where we are now. Just take us through what the government has attempted and why it has not been successful so far. Even the vaunted whistleblower program didn't bear much fruit.
Yes, I think generally if you look at the anti-corruption efforts of the current administration, I think one thing which is obvious is that the efforts have not been commensurate with the results. So there were lots of expectations by Nigerians, there were lots of expectations by citizens, but actually the current administration has fallen short to meet this expectation. This is seen in the different reports aside the TI's Corruption Perception Index. I mean, you saw the Auditor General's reports. That's actually from a government agency. I mean, you have scenarios where the executive is actually even accusing another arm of government, that's the legislature, of actually having figures and duplicated or padding budgets and the rest. So if we have all this, and if you look at all this, I think these are challenges and these are issues that should be resolved. So generally, if we look at the corruption agenda of the current administration, like I mentioned earlier, the efforts have not been commensurate with the results. This is seen on the Corruption Perception Index, and not just even on the Corruption Perception Index. You could check the Corruption Barometer, which is actually even conducted by Nigerian-led NOI polls. That also showed a decline. You check the World Freedom House Index, there's also a decline. Different indices actually show declines in the government's efforts to combat corruption. And I think this is something the government should work towards. This is not to knock off the efforts of the anti-graft agencies. In terms of asset recoveries, they've actually been trying to do efforts to recover assets. But then the problem also comes in these assets that are recovered by different agencies, over 5 of them. Is there a central register? Is there a central database accessible by citizens to actually see the progress, to see what has been done? The answer is no, because you and I don't even know how much has been recovered. We hear about all this in the papers daily, but we don't know how much. And I think that's an issue, and that's something that we need to also work on. In terms of conviction, we also acknowledge the conviction of the anti-graft agencies. I think a few weeks ago we had the EFCC actually celebrating 2,220 convictions. I mean, those are nice, and that's actually nice indices. But then you still find citizens wanting high-profile, politically exposed persons being convicted. And I mean, it's fine to actually convict internet fraudsters, to convict what we call Yahoo boys. That's actually fine if they go against the law. I think that's fine. But then individuals need high-profile cases of corruption. Like I mentioned on the Pandora Papers, they need answers. If these people are guilty, if they're not guilty, you need to actually respond to this and get this done. So I think these are also the issues. The anti-graft agencies need to do more. There needs to be coordination amongst the anti-graft agencies. They need to better coordinate in combating this corruption. We understand they have political interference, they have budgetary challenges. We know these things because sometimes we also engage with them and we're not ruling this out. But generally, if you look at the anti-corruption efforts, it's not been commensurate with the results. Lots of expectations, but these expectations were not met.
So please, I take me to school, educate me. I've always had problems with the word perception. What's the empirical metrics for measuring perception? And it's quite very iffy because it's perception, really. I'd like to know that. And what are the methodology of your arrival at your perception index? And how empirical is it?
Thank you very much, Rufai. Yes, thank you very much, Rufai. So there are different modes of measuring corruption. You have experience, you have perception, and perception is actually what we use for the CPI index. Other models like the corruption barometer use experience survey. But back to your question around the methodology of the corruption perception index, CPI. So what Transparency International does is the CPI is a composite data that was actually developed in 1995. Because we understand that things are dynamic and that the corruption itself is dynamic, the methodology for measuring the CPI was also reviewed in 2012, and we had a new methodology. And this methodology was actually audited because Transparency International gives this methodology for audit, and it was audited in 2012 by the European Commission Joint Research Center, and it was also audited in 2017, and they found out that the methodology is statistically coherent and has a balanced structure. Now, moving on to the methodology itself. So the CPI for 2021 uses 8 sources. We have the World Bank Country Policy Assessment. You have the Bertelsmann Foundation Transformation Index. You have the World Justice Rule of Law Project. You have the World Economic Forum. We have the Varieties for Democracy and a couple of others, which makes up the 8 sources being used for the Corruption Perception Index. Now, what we do is each of the sources have different scales of measuring corruption. Some have 0 to 7, some have 0 to 100. So TI standardizes this and then get the mean average. Of course, there are lots of statistics in there, but the mean average of all these actually gives the score for the country. And for the case of Nigeria in 2021, Nigeria scored 24 out of 100. And with that score, you can now actually rank countries to see where they are. So this is like the methodology we use.
Okay, so let me get it right, please. So what you're doing is a weighted average methodology. You have 8 variables and you take a weighted average. But how about the fact that those indicators or those parameters like the World Bank, a lot of people have said is skewed. You know, is there like a disposition to the sample size of these different parameters, and what informed the parameters in the first place? You know, and why is it called perception, really? Because perception is poetry. So that's just it. And when you're saying,
thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rufai. I was actually still coming to that. So what we do, of all these sources, why we pick these sources? So TI ensures that these sources quantify corruption on the public sector. They must be based on a valid methodology. They are performed by credible institutions. Now, what do they do? So these individuals actually measure the perception of corruption in a country by country experts in the country and also business persons in the country. So we check for bribery. We check for the strength of institutions. The CPI checks for the ability of the anti-graft agencies to actually investigate cases of corruption and prosecute them. It checks for nepotism, favoritism in appointments of individuals into public office and also jobs. It checks for access to information. So these are the indicators and a couple of other indicators which the CPI checks for. So the CPI checks for all these indicators from these sources. I think I got your comment about people saying the sources, people having issues with the sources. But then this is a global index, and it's important we understand this, where it ranks other countries. Also, it's also important to state that for some of these sources, we have, when our government actually go into some of these sources, like for loans, for example, you have the World Bank. Like we do lots of interventions and engagement with the World Bank. I mean, if it's time for loan, you go to the World Bank, but when we use the World Bank's data, then you tell us the data, you don't agree with the data. Generally, on our part as TI Nigeria, we get to experience this. When we have different administrations. Once individuals are in opposition, they dispute the data. Once they are in power, rather, they dispute the data. And once they are in the opposition, they actually clap for this data. I think it's an experience we have over time. But the fact and the point remains that the issue is that we have the efforts are not commensurate with the results. And this is seen not only on the TI Corruption Perception Index, but all other index that actually measure this across board. And I think it's time for us to actually do sort of soul searching and try to engage this process and see how we make the country better.
But, okay, I mean, go ahead.
Well, Asimi, quickly, let me ask you, the report by CISLAC identifies areas of weakness, audit report, judicial challenges, security sector corruption, failure to take on high-profile cases. But I'm interested in weakness 6 as identified, which is corruption in the COVID-19 pandemic response. And that happens to be the shortest paragraph in the statement that was put out by CISLAC. I know there have been, concerns generally, even among the the people, about whether or not this COVID-19 is just an attempt by government and certain persons to make money. Could you share with us some of the details you have with regard to corruption and COVID-19 pandemic management in Nigeria?
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati, for that. So if you look at it generally, all through the COVID pandemic, we had issues. I mean, from the palliatives to the scandal with the NDDC, up through individuals diverting palliatives meant for citizens, branding them, and being used as souvenirs for birthdays and also for party loyalists. I think these are real disturbing issues and these are disturbing trends. And the problem and the challenge is we are yet to see high-profile individuals, or we are yet to see proper action as to this. You even look at lots of people, lots of investigations have actually also revealed procurement gaps, procurement issues in terms of procuring you'd see clinical equipment like thermometers and the rest. We found some of them overpriced. I think the Center for International Center for Investigative Reporting, ICIR, had research on that, where a report on that where they found thermometers I think close to even 5 times the prices. So we had lots of inflicted contract and all these issues, and we are really yet to see individuals brought to book on that, and we're really yet to see these allegations really cleared. So when you talk of issues around the response to corruption and the pandemic, these are the issues we're talking about. There's a need to actually put these matters to rest through the usual criminal justice process. We need investigations, we need prosecutions, we need convictions. And once these are not done, and once citizens don't see high-profile cases, then, of course, you know things are wrong. Because we all saw this. You are conversant with the news because this is your job, and you must have seen the reports. You must have seen all this in the papers. You must have seen them in the press and the rest. You saw how palliatives were being diverted, and we don't really have anything or much to hold on that. So I think these are the issues, and these are the areas we, as a country, especially these anti-graft agencies and law enforcement agencies, need to actually work on.
Right, let's talk about lessons learned and solutions as a general election beckons. What mistakes did we make in assuming that one man in President Muhammadu Buhari, because of his own ascetic lifestyle, the fact that he could never be accused of being profligate in any way, was going to do some kind of magic here, and that clearly has not happened. What should we be looking forward to? What are the things that we need to address? Because it's not about an individual. This is a systemic issue. Even this report only talks about the public sector, not even the private sector. The issue is wide. What should we be looking at to finally get rid of corruption in Nigeria?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and this is something we've been pushing for. We shouldn't just have us highlighting the problems, but we should have our solutions. And if you look at the statement we had put out, the report, we also tried to highlight these issues, and we point them out there. So in terms of preventive measures, we should have systems in place to prevent corruption. So in terms of procurement issues, budgetary issues, we should have systems in place. That's on one hand, that's preventive, and then we should have corrective, where we have the anti-graft agencies doing their work, diligently investigating, diligently prosecuting, and of course the judiciary also convicting them if they are found guilty. On one hand, you have you trying to prevent this, and on the other hand, you have anti-graft agencies correcting and investigating that. But I think if we do more of the preventive approach, and this involves having legal frameworks in place, like Whistleblower Act, we need to have a whistleblower in place. We have a policy, but the policy doesn't really cater for witness protection and victim protection, and it's just a policy domiciled in the Ministry of Finance, but we need a broad policy where citizens who actually blow the whistle can actually get refuge, or there should be a plan. You shouldn't have individuals facing backlash because they actually revealed information. So I think these are the issues. Issues like having a legislation to actually coordinate the recovery of proceeds of crime. That's also very, very important. So we need to have all those systems in place in form of laws. We need to have system in place in form of using IT to actually support procurement and different issues. And on the other end, we need anti-graft agencies to actually continue and improve their investigations of these matters. Thank you.
Okay, great. And we've talked about, the solutions to the problems and things happening in the space. But real quickly, I want to ask, because I'm still not convinced about this perception thing, because I don't feel there's an empirical base point to perception. Is that probably a further review, of those parameters. I'm probably, if it's like, corruption count index or something, maybe that's going to be a new name for it. But this idea of perception is still very iffy to me. So when is there going to be a review for that? And secondly, what would you like to say, to people in different rungs of, government parastatal? Because a lot of these reports come out of them. I mean, the MDAs, for instance, you saw the Auditor General's report as regards the police and the MDA recently. So what would you like to say, to these people as form of advice for things to be a whole lot better? But I'm still iffy about the word perception. I mean, don't mind me, it's just still having questions in my head.
Thank you, Rufai. And I think it's normal because we get this response. But then, like I explained earlier, if you set out to do a research, you could have the experience. If you wanted the experience, you could have the perception. And these are research methods. And for Transparency International, we have the barometer, which measures experience. We have the corruption perceptions, which measures perceptions. And now the point of this all is for the experience, you have citizens talking about their day-to-day experience of bribery. For the perception, you have business persons, you have country experts who actually work, who actually carry out contracts, who have issues, who have cause to engage with public officials. And these are country experts, and oftentimes they are also citizens of a country. So generally, there are different ways to research, and this is the perception of country experts and business people who do business in Nigeria, and that's the result. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a methodology. We shared this with colleagues from the press when we released this 2 days ago on Tuesday, and the methodology is out there. We can actually still share it. As a matter of fact, last year, around March last year, the government actually set up a task force to actually look into Nigerians' poor rating on the CPI. And I think in October, we actually got reports of them. We think this is a good step, but then it's important to understand that it's not just holding the perception or holding the experience, but it's also really understanding that either when perception is used or when experience is used through the corruption barometer or other entities like the World Freedom House or like the World Reporters Without Borders or the World Press Freedom Index, that on all these indexes, we're actually not getting it right. So you could say from different ways you use to measure this, we still have the problem of corruption, and as a country, we need to do better to improve it. And I think this is the message, and this is what we should push forward.
Well, Asimi, I've seen your statement, but I haven't quite seen the government's reaction. What has been the reaction from the side of government to this? Because the standard thing is to dismiss the report and to say, look, those parameters are not correct, and these are just agitators in Nigeria, reporting negative things about their own country using the international platform. So in terms of lessons, do you have any expectation that government will listen or do anything, or just dismiss it?
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati, for that. So we, like I mentioned earlier, governments come and go. But the CPI has been here since 1995. At some times, we have individuals in governments. Once they are there, they actually dismiss it. But once they're in the opposition, they also try to accept this. But the methodology is there. The CPI is there. It doesn't change. The facts are out there. You can check out the methodology. We are willing to share this. We get reactions. And in some cases, interestingly, through non-public means, like not through the media, we have anti-graft agencies reaching out. How did you get the methodology? We need to have this. We want to know how this is done. And we're actually willing and open to actually engage with anti-graft and law enforcement agencies on these issues. So I think generally we get different reactions. You get accolades, you get knocks from different individuals at different spectrums and different areas. But moving forward, I think it's the call for soul searching is for us to understand that we have challenges. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not just about CPI, because if you say it's TI, I said the Auditor General's report was released in November last year. So that was not Transparency International, that wasn't CISLAC, that was the Auditor General. And it actually highlighted that in a case we had, I think about 9 MDs actually spending about 49 billion naira without appropriation, which is, of course, against the Constitution. So these are issues. This is not just us, but these are problems we actually have. You have the executive saying the legislature actually had some things in the budgets that were not right on some budget lines. We have these complaints. You see them every time. So it's not just saying it's TI or it's CISLAC, but this is an issue we all know it's out there and we all face, and we should actually try our best to work on it. So on learning, on reactions, yes, we get positive, we get negative reactions, but this is expected once the CPI is out. But the thing moving forward is, against all these reactions, it's important for the state actors, the public officials to actually really look into this because it's actually costing us in terms of corruption and security. Like our report captured, the Cable Index and the Council on Foreign Relations actually highlighted in a report they did that about over 5,000 Nigerians actually die of insecurity, and that was an average of 14 Nigerians dying daily. There's price for when we have corruption within the security sector. This is the price Nigerians are paying daily. And I think this is actually what we should be looking at, and these are the cases and the issues we should try to resolve. So once we have all this, we should try to solve these issues holistically, aside throwing the blame games, because aside TI, even within the government, like I mentioned, we also have reports that are also damning and don't actually speak well.
Yeah, well, fine point there. Thank you very much, Samuel Asimi, for joining us on The Morning Show.